Hi friends, and welcome back to Marvelous Friends, your home for all things Marvel Cinematic Universe and beyond. I'm Rhett, and today I'm going to be breaking down a storyline with all those MCU Webslingers. Roll that credit. I briefly touched on this idea in a previous video where I discussed all the potential girlfriends for Tom Holland's Peter Parker come Spider-Man 3. And it all kind of derived down into a theory video that I am now sharing with you. If you have not yet seen this video, I do highly suggest checking it out first. You can click on it up here in the card and then come back to this one afterwards. So basically all this came about regarding one specific piece of evidence I came across, something I had not realized was a thing until putting all that together, and that specifically revolves around the image that I included for the character Cindy Moon on that countdown. For those of you who may not recognize the name again, that is the alias of Silk, a Asian American female web-slinger who lives alongside Peter Parker in New York City in the comic books. And it turns out that she's been living alongside our Peter Parker in the MCU this entire time, as well as she is a classmate and fellow member of his decathlon team in Homecoming, as we find out. Now, her name isn't directly mentioned in the story, and yes, you can kind of sort of maybe make out the name on her name tag during the decathlon, but she is a credited named character in the film as played by Tiffany Espison. I'm not sure if I pronounced that correct. I'm really sorry. Now, this, of course, is something that is done intentionally as she is named once again. Many times, side characters that are named, quote unquote, or referenced directly often just use the actor's name if it's not someone that is from the comic books. Take example Abe in Homecoming, who's played by Abraham, or Zach in Far From Home, who is played by Zach. Now, this is kind of a trend for these kind of side characters, so the fact that Marvel took the time to actually name her Cindy and give her that credit title is very important. Now, of course, we haven't really dived into the exploration of this role, and it could just be a nod to us fans that I'm reading way too much into it. But hey, that's what we do here on these kind of channels. We read way too much into things, and that's how we get these fun theories for all of you guys to watch. Now, her reference is a lot more subtle than our other web-slinger that is referenced in Homecoming, that being Miles Morales. He is referenced via his uncle, Aaron Davis, whom is the Prowler in his own right. In an extension to the scene where we see the two interacting, that being Aaron Davis and Peter Parker, we actually learn that Miles Morales does exist as Aaron is seen on the phone with him, and is implied in this interaction that Miles Morales is potentially a bit younger than Peter Parker is at the time. However, in the current dynamic of things, that is easily fixed with Miles Morales staying behind during the snap and catching up in those 5 years of age over the period of the blip. We also know that he is bitten by a spider that is left over from the same batch that bit Peter Parker, and then he developing his own powers from that. We also know then eventually when Peter Parker dies in the comic books, it is Miles Morales who takes over the mantra of Spider-Man. However, we're going to get into all that in a lot more detail regarding how he would fit in within the MCU storyline here within my theory in just a bit. Let's return first back to Silk. Silk in the comic books has almost the exact same origin story as Peter Parker. In fact, it's the same spider that bites her that bit Peter Parker while out on their high school field trip. And since they both go to the same high school, it's very easily conceived that this would work out in the MCU. Now, at this point, though, we do see a divergent in their storylines, as when her powers surface, she accidentally cocoons her parents in her webbing. Now, this is when she is approached by Ezekiel, who promises to teach her how to use and control her abilities, which he does. But his main purpose for approaching her is to protect her from the oncoming threat of Morlun. Now, Ezekiel also has spider-based powers and is aware of all this because he knows that Morlun is after spider totem beings that contain any kind of form of spider-based powers. Now, Morlun feeds off these totem beings, and there's actually a variety of other types of totems out there that derive their powers from other types of animals. It's just Morlun has a preferential taste for spider totems. Now, he does this through constructing a special box or bunker that he houses Silk in that allows the kind of blocking of Morlun's senses to track her down. And she willingly goes in here after she learns about Morlun and his intentions and the risk that she is at. Eventually, Peter Parker, as Spider-Man, does have to face Morlun and is able to defeat him, and seeks out Cindy when he learns about her existence, freeing her from her bunker for the first time after 13 years. Now, she then continues her own kind of path of crime fighting, adapting the name Silk officially. However, eventually Morlun is resurrected and comes after them again, as well as the rest of his kind known as the Inheritors, though they eventually do take them down as well. After this is done, Silk continues her own story, seeking out to find her parents, who she has not seen after all these years, learning that they are still alive. Most recently, she has been added to the roster of the new Agents of Atlas, an all-Asian superhero fighting team. As I mentioned in the same video where I first introduced this kind of idea of Silk being a part of Spider-Man 3, I mentioned that I believe that we will see some exploration of Peter Parker's origin story to become Spider-Man, as this is something that I know I myself and others I've talked to are curious about to see kind of this version's iteration of Uncle Ben and that whole storyline. Now, it has been very refreshing to not start at this point, as it's something that we have seen time and time again, and to get to start at a different point in Peter's story has been fantastic. So, by exploring the story of Cindy and learning about her origin stories and making those connections to Peter's would be really kind of a fun, refreshing way to get this origin story and still kind of flush out some of those details that I know I and others have been curious about. Now, what we could see here is as she explains her origin stories in relation to her parents, we could potentially find some connections and references to Uncle Ben and flesh out that character that I, again, have questions about. Though, one of my major questions is actually if Uncle Ben exists at all in this iteration's storytelling, because we really haven't seen any reference to it at all besides the initials BFP on the suitcase, which could be a reference to his father just as much as it could be Uncle Ben. Now, I say this because in the events of Homecoming and Far From Home, we don't see him dealing with this grief at all. And we know since he's living with Aunt May, at some point in his past, he lost his parents as well. And to go through everything he's going through in Far From Home with the loss of Tony and dealing with that grief, you think it would come up all this other loss that he's experienced in his life, and it kind of as an explanation and exploration as to why the loss of Tony is hitting him that much harder, because that's a lot of loss to go through. And so considering we haven't got any reference to that, especially at this point where it seemed to be most logically tied into everything else that's going on in his life, I have to leave with the question, is there an Uncle Ben? And it's a question I really want to be answered at some point in this iteration of the storytelling. From here, we would learn that during this 5-year gap of everything that's been going on, that she has been off with Ezekiel training and controlling her abilities. Her power surfacing sometime during the events of Homecoming herself, and then Ezekiel seeking her out at that time as well. Now, this would be kind of a slightly different storytelling, which, again, I like the idea of, from the comic books, using that inspiration and developing a new story. So here we'd actually see Ezekiel approaching her to recruit her to be the person to take down Morlun, as he had planned this to be Peter all along, but when he was snapped away, had to turn and find another hero that had spider-based powers. Enter Silk, aka Cindy Moon. Now, when Peter is blipped back and she learns about all this during the events of Far From Home, she seeks him out to recruit him to join in the upcoming battle and protect him now that his identity is public knowledge. This would explain where she has been, as she, of course, would have graduated and continued on during that 5-year stint, and that's why she was not present in that high school field trip to Europe. While we're here, we could potentially explore other members of the Spider Society besides Ezekiel and Silk, perhaps meeting their newest recruit, Miles Morales, and even learning of Spider-Woman, aka Jessica, who is working with the Spider Society along with her contacts at S.H.I.E.L.D. and S.W.O.R.D. to help track Morlun down themselves. Ultimately, though, we'll learn that Morlun is going after Peter's friends and family to lure him out, as again, he knows his identity and goes after them. Ultimately, Peter will leave his hiding to go do what he sees right and protect them and potentially do whatever it has to be done, even sacrifice himself to take them down. This would then, of course, lead to our major showdown moment between the Spider Society and Morlun. Here we could learn a very interesting new take on Miles Morales' storyline and origins as well, with utilizing this whole concept of the blip as part of that. Now, in the comics, he receives his bite from a similar spider as well that is left over in the abandoned facility that once housed the company that provided the spiders that built our other 2 web slingers so far. Now, we saw because of the snap in the following 5 years, certain aspects of the world kind of have fallen into disrepair and are abandoned, and we know that this all takes place for Miles in an abandoned facility where he is doing his graffiti tagging. Now, this could all be due to, the CEO being snapped away or just a lack of workforce because of all that, and the company has since shut down, and all all of that, basically. However, when the blip occurs and all the organisms that were snapped away suddenly return, we could see all this play out very quickly for Miles. As a half of workforce returns to the facility that he's in, he freaks out. And not only that, he has somehow found his way into the room that previously housed the spiders themselves, and one of them blipping back onto his body and instantly biting him. All this confusion causing him to run, where eventually he is found by Ezekiel, who takes him in to train him as well, much like he did Silk, and also keep him safe from Morloon's hunt. Side note here, I hope that this would also then bring back Donald Glover's Aaron Davis to the story, with him fully taking on the identity of Prowler now, using those anti-gravity wall climbers that were mentioned in Homecoming. Keeping it something new, though, he would be introduced as something of kind of an inside man, with Miles keeping in touch with his uncle while in hiding, and him kind of in return helping protect the Spider Society from the growing villain presence that's kind of come about in this kind of post world where we're not really sure what's happening next with all the heroes and everything that's going on there. Now, this would again allow for a new take on the story, where basically Miles is actually able to successfully turn his uncle from his criminal ways. We know that there are hints and setups for a lot of these characters, and actually there is some potential inferring to this idea as well, as a strong hinting at an upcoming hunt is prevalent in Far From Home, and much of this comes as a reference to Kraven the Hunter, who we kind of saw would potentially be the servicing villain in the next installment of the story, as there is a strong tie-in to the Dimitri character, aka Chameleon, that appears in Far From Home, who is actually Kraven the Hunter's brother. Now, this could still mean that he is involved in some way, but I think this hunt is kind of a directional thing that lead us in one direction, where we still get this kind of hunting down of Spider-Man storyline, but in a different way through Morloon. Though he could be using Kraven as a lackey to kind of help him hunt down these spider totem people, though kind of keeping the fact that he feeds on them a secret from Kraven, and he's just kind of a lackey in this aspect of the story. To be really honest here, this is actually why I ended up putting Cindy at #1 on this list, because this all kind of came rushing at me all at once when I was building that list, and I was like, this is a fantastic storyline, I want this to happen. Cindy is getting put at #1 on this list, so I can kind of build up this idea of this theory. But it is, of course, just a theory. None of this is based on fact or rumor or anything like that from Marvel Studios. This is completely just a creation out of own mind. I think it'd be a fun way to approach this Spider multiverse story without actually having to dive into a multiverse. I really enjoy the Into the Spider-Verse ideas that come from the comic books, especially the one with the Inheritors and all the spider beings coming together to take them down. Ultimately, they could decide to introduce the idea of the other dimensions and recruiting some of those other spider people from other dimensions. However, if they do that, I think they need to be unnamed characters. We don't need to get into them. I think it would just open up for way too many storylines and character developments for one film to handle. So those would just kind of be unnamed background spider people that you would recognize based upon their costuming and all that, but don't necessarily need to be explored beyond that. What do you think, though? I really want to hear your thoughts down in those comments below. I'm really kind of passionate about this theory. It's something that I really developed, I really liked, and I would like to know what you think. Would you like to see this kind of story come up in the MCU, especially considering everything we know? This could be a potential way to really round out a Spider-Man story if everything happens regarding the contract of Tom Holland. You can check out my thoughts on that up in the card right now. I did a whole video about his contract and what that could mean for the MCU. This could also then, if things don't go the great way and Sony decides to not continue working with Marvel, to give Marvel Webslingers to work with, being Cindy, being Spider-Woman, and not Miles Morales, of course, because technically Sony does have the rights for him as they're using him in their animated features. But yeah, it would definitely give them some opportunities to move forward with still having Webslingers in the MCU, though again, this does raise questions regarding Sony's rights to Spider-Man characters, so there would probably be some clarification on all that stuff as well. But I think it would be a great continuation of the story and allow for a potential setup to end Tom Holland's Peter Parker's role within the MCU if that does happen. Knock on wood. At this, though, this is really all I have to say for this video. So if you liked it, please like it, please share it. I really do appreciate it when you guys do that. Of course, like I said, leave comments. I'd love to know your thoughts, especially on this one. Of course, subscribe and set your alerts so you can catch all my future videos as we get more details about all this. Who knows? Maybe I'm onto something here. Until that time, though, I love you all 3,000. I hope you have a marvelous rest of your day. Bye, friend.